In this session, we're going to talk about how to add 3D dimensions and 3D text to the camera views you create. Let's start with 3D dimensions. We're going to start by looking at how the basics of dimension defaults work, and we'll take a look at some settings specific to 3D dimensions and how they're applicable to the various dimension tools in Chief Architect. In general, the dimension default settings for adding dimensions to your 2D views behave very similarly for adding dimensions to your 3D views. Let's take a look at this for the dimension default settings for the Auto Exterior Dimension tool. So in our top toolbar, we're going to go to Edit Active View, and then in this specification, go to Selected Defaults, where you can see that I have the Plan Dimension defaults active, and we can create a copy of them and edit them, rename it, or delete it. And let's go ahead and click on Edit. And on the left hand side, if we go down to the panel that says Locate Auto Exterior, you can see that they're set up to locate the wall dimension layer, which in this case is going to be the framing layer. And underneath Locate Objects, they're set to pick up the sides of openings. Let's go ahead and cancel out of this and press cancel one more time, and then generate Auto Exterior Dimensions for our 2D view. And you can see how they came in exactly based on those settings. We can add Auto Exterior Dimensions to our 3D views the exact same way. So let's go up to our camera views and get in a perspective full overview. And then we'll go to our automatic dimension tools, select Auto Exterior Dimensions, and you can see how those dimensions came into our 3D scene. Let's take a look at a few more settings specifically for dimensions in 3D views. If we come up to where it says Edit Active View, and then on the Selected Defaults panel, come over and edit the Plan Dimension defaults, and then go to the panel on the left hand side that says General. Notice here at the bottom there's a section for 3D display. The first setting says Extend Extensions to Mark. Notice that I have some dimensions down here, and there's extensions that go into the plan and move up to locate the window. If I uncheck this setting, this vertical extension will no longer be present. So I've got that unchecked. We'll click on OK, click on OK one more time, and you can now see how that mark is no longer present. Additionally, notice that how as I rotate my 3D view, that the label that is along those dimension strings is rotating to always face the camera. This is a setting that you can have turned on or turned off, and if you have it turned off, you can have the label either face in a horizontal or vertical direction. Let's take a look at this by going back up to where it says Edit Active View. And then on our Plan Dimension defaults, click on the Edit button. And then down towards the bottom, let's go ahead and recheck Extend Extensions to Mark. But right here, there's that checkbox that says Label Faces Camera. So I will go ahead and uncheck this, and then click on OK. And then click on OK one more time. And now you can see how that label is facing in a horizontal direction along the dimension string. Let's take a look at where the setting is to have it face vertically. If we go back up to where it says Edit Active View, underneath the Plan Dimension defaults, if we click on Edit, and then on the left hand side, if we go to Set Up Automatic, here's where we can set up how the Auto Exterior Dimensions work. Notice that there's also a section for the Auto Room Dimensions, but for the Auto Exterior Dimensions, there is a checkbox right here that says Vertical, that when we check it and go back to the 3D view, the label will now be displayed in a vertical position. There's also an option here to control how high those 3D dimensions generate in your view. Notice I currently have that set to 10 inches, but let's change it to something a little bit more drastic to make it easy to visualize, and click on OK, and then click on OK. And then let's regenerate those dimensions by going up to our Auto Exterior Dimension tool. And you can see how those dimension labels are now facing vertically, and the dimension strings are now 96 inches off the ground. If I click on one of these dimension strings, you'll notice that just like with our 2D dimensions, there's a little square handle in the middle of the label that you can click and hold to move the label around. And there's also a triangle handle next to it that you can use to rotate it. Additionally, next to where I clicked, there is a red square handle that lets you move the string around. And we'll go into more details about how to move dimensions around in a few moments. And you can also manually edit these dimensions to control what they're locating. If I click on one of these dimensions, notice how we get diamond handles locating the side of the window. I can remove one of these points by left clicking and holding and dragging that point off into some free space and release my mouse. And then similarly, I can add a point by left clicking on the string, and notice I get a little extra diamond handle close to where I clicked, and then I can left click and hold and bring that onto a point along that string. And then there's a few settings that allow you to control the formatting for the font. If we come back up to where it says Edit Active View, and then go back to edit the dimension defaults, and then on the left go down to where it says Text Style, we're having the layer controller text style here, but if we select Use Custom Text Style, here you can control information about the font, how high they'll generate. There's a setting here that says transparent. If we take a look at this by clicking OK, you can now see how those labels are transparent. Now, one thing to note about 3D dimensions is that they're going to be specific to the camera view that you created the dimensions in. So if I were to close this camera view without saving it, these 3D dimensions would be lost. I can click on the Save Active View button to save it, or I can go ahead and go to close the view. And because I've added some annotations to the view, it's going to give us a message saying, do you wish to save the camera? I'll go ahead and click on Yes. And then in my floor plan view, you can see where that camera call out is, and I can just double click on it to reopen that view. 3D temporary dimensions can be used to edit objects and will display based on your settings in your active dimension defaults. To turn on the 3D temporary dimensions, you go up to View and then Temporary Dimensions, or you can click on the button in your toolbar on the right hand side that has the T with the arrows going through it, and you'll know that it's turned on once it has a check mark next to it. Next, if you come over to an object and you click on it, you'll get a temporary dimension showing the size of the object and locating objects around it. If I want to move this door around in the wall, I can then come over to the temporary dimension going from the door to the wall, and as I hover my mouse over the label, notice how I get feedback for the marked edges of the dimension. I can then click on that dimension, type in my new value, and press enter, and that door's position will update within the wall. Similarly, you can use 3D temporary dimensions to resize objects. If I come over to the right hand side of the door and I click once, notice that I get a red square handle letting me know that this is my active edge, as opposed to the left hand side which does not have a red square handle. With the right hand side being my active edge, I can then come over to the temporary 3D dimension showing the object size, type in my new desired value, and press enter. And because the right hand side was my active side, the resize action will occur about this right hand side. Let's look at a couple more settings for 3D temporary dimensions by rotating our view around and focusing on this beverage station. If I come over to this cabinet at the beverage station and I click once, notice how I click towards the top hand side of it and I get a vertically running temporary dimension. And if I click on the right hand side, notice how I get some horizontally running temporary dimensions. These temporary dimensions are a little bit busy. First, notice how I get two rows of dimensions. Row number 1 is locating cabinets and other objects around it, and row number 2 is locating the walls around it. Let's take a look at how you can edit 3D temporary dimensions to be a little bit more usable for the task at hand by going up to the Edit Active View button. And then here under the dimensions option, you can see that we have the plan dimension defaults active, and being more or less interior design work or cabinet design work, the plan dimension default may not be the best one to use. So let's go ahead and change from the plan dimension defaults to the kitchen and bath dimension defaults. And then next, let's make some edits to them specifically for 3D. So what I'm going to do is click on the Add New Dimension Default button. This will create a copy of it, and let's go ahead and just edit the name at the end to read 3D, and then click on OK. And with our newly created dimension default open, there's a panel on the left hand side that says Setup Temporary, and a few edits we can make here to make them a little bit more usable. First, under dimension row limit, let's go ahead and change this from 2 to 1. And then down below, you can see the objects that the temporary dimensions are locating. Just as a simple example, let's go ahead and uncheck openings and make it so that we're just locating cabinet sides. And then let's uncheck all of the other categories that we see here. And then click on OK. And then click on OK to bring them into the plan. And now if I come over to this cabinet and click once on the right hand side, they're much more readable and easy to work with. You can also manually add 3D dimensions to your camera scenes. Let's take a look. I'm back in our 3D view and I'm in the vector view rendering technique. Let's add a manual dimension going along the side of our countertop right here, and then we'll continue it over to the countertop on the base cabinets along the other side. There's a tool in Chief Architect that makes it easy to add a dimension to a selected edge. So what I'm going to do is come over to the edge of our countertop and left click once, and I'll get this red handle letting me know that this is my active selected edge. And then in the bottom toolbar there's an option here that says Dimension Selected Edge. I'm going to go ahead and click on that once, and you can see how the program generated a dimension. If I click on that dimension, notice that I get a red handle that lets me move it around along the countertop. If I want to move this dimension vertically so it's floating above the countertop a little bit, I can click on that move handle again, and an icon will appear with arrows, and as I move my mouse over the different arrows, notice how the tips of them highlight, indicating which direction I can move that dimension. So I'm going to come over to the blue arrows and then left click and move my mouse up, and you can also hold Control to unlock the snapping, and then just move it until it's in a new position and then release, and there you can see how it is floating over the countertop. Next, if I want to move its position again, notice how I've rotated my camera, and if I come over to the dimension and I click, I don't get that red move handle to move it. And instead, in the bottom toolbar, there's an option I can use that says Move Object. And when I click on that, the icon appears, and I can then use those arrows to move it into a new position. Let's continue this dimension to the cabinet objects on the other side. So I'm going to click on the dimension, and at the end use the Extend handle and just extend it until we reach the other side. And there you can see our dimension generated, and it picked up a few extra locations. Let's go ahead and remove these by clicking on the dimension and then coming over to the diamond handle that matches up with those locations, and then just left click and drag it off into some free space to remove them. Next, let's go through how to manually add a dimension using the manual dimension tools. The first step in manually adding a dimension is to try to get your camera view facing directly at the area that you want to dimension. In our example, we're going to be dimensioning the side of our base cabinet, the countertop, and the moldings for the wall cabinet. So I am just going to rotate it until I'm a little bit more eye level and then just reposition it to about there. The next step is to determine the best dimension tool to use for your dimensioning task, and then edit its dimension default settings to your liking. Because we're going to be dimensioning multiple objects, I know that the best tool to use for our scenario is going to be the manual dimension tool. Next, let's go ahead and edit the settings for this tool. And up until now, I've been editing the settings by going to Edit Active View. But one faster way to directly access those settings is to double click on where it says Manual Dimension. And this will open up the dimension defaults and place you on your active dimension default. In this case, the kitchen and bath dimension defaults 3D. I'm on the panel that says Locate Manual, which corresponds with the manual dimension tool. And then under Locate Objects, you can specify which objects you want to be locating. And just to keep our example simple, I'm going to have it only locating cabinet sides, moldings, and countertops. And then I'll come down and click on OK. And when I come back into the 3D view, notice that my mouse pointer has been replaced with a dash crosshairs with a circle in it. And as I move my mouse across different bounding boxes of objects in the view, notice how it updates to locate different surfaces. So here I am going flat against the top of the countertop, along the side of our end panel, I'm going vertically along the front face of the cabinet, and I'm just going to come until I'm over on the side of the cabinet. Next, I can left click once to establish the plane that I'm going to be dimensioning in. There I have the plane established, and notice that I get this feedback grid helping me place my dimension. So I'm going to come down until I'm at the bottom of this base cabinet, and notice that I get the red hourglass letting me know that I'm on the object. And another note, notice how my crosshair running vertically is going through the side of the base cabinet, the countertop, and then the wall cabinet. So I know it's in a good position, and then I can left click once and bring my mouse up and just continue drawing it up until I'm at the top of the crown molding, and then release, and there that dimension will be generated. And then I can press spacebar and click on it and move it into a new position as I desire. When adding 3D dimensions, you can have the dimensioning plane get established based on the bounding box surrounding an object or directly on individual surfaces on the object. Let's take a look. So here I am in a new plan that has a few miscellaneous objects added to it, and let's say that I wanted to dimension this staircase railing. If I come up to our dimension tools and I select the point-to-point dimension tool, notice in the bottom left-hand corner there are a few different options. This first option I'm on says draw on bounding box, and when I bring my mouse over to the staircase, notice how I can establish the dimensioning plane based on the front or the side of the staircase. If I switch this from draw on bounding box to draw on surface, and then I come over to the staircase, notice how I'm now locating individual surfaces on that staircase, and then it makes it much easier to establish the plane directly on the railing. So I'm going to click once, and then notice how my dimensioning plane is now at an angle, and then I can come down to the corner of the railing, left click and drag my mouse to the top of it, and very easily add a 3D dimension for that staircase railing length. Let's reposition the camera and look at one final setting for adding 3D dimensions. If we come up to my manual dimension tools and double click on manual dimension, you can see that the only option that I have dialed in here for this dimension default is the cabinets. And if we get out of this and then we come over to the plane that we want to dimension, click once to establish the plane, and then click and draw our dimension. Notice how our dimensions are floating a little bit off of the countertop. This is a setting that you can dial in for how far they will offset when you draw them. If I come back up to the manual dimension tool, in the bottom left hand corner there's an option here for set offset. Here I have them at 3 inches, so they generated 3 inches above the countertop. But let's just change this value so it's easy to recognize what happens when I add them again. I'll go ahead and change them to 24 inches and click on OK, and then come back to the countertop, click once to establish the dimensioning plane, and then go from the left side to the right side, and you can see how they're now drawing at that different offset value. And that's going to be how to add 3D dimensions to your camera views. Next, let's talk about how to add 3D text to your camera views. You can add 3D text to your 3D camera views similarly to how you can add it to your 2D views. Let's take a look at the basic settings for 3D text and some examples of how to add it to your 3D views. The first step in adding 3D text is to position your 3D camera so that it's directly facing the plane that you want to add the 3D text in. So I'm going to reposition my 3D camera until it's facing this end panel. Next, you want to double check what your text defaults are. So let's go up to Edit Active View, and then over on the left we're on Selected Defaults, and we have the kitchen and bath rich text defaults active. Let's go ahead and create a copy of this and make them more appropriate for 3D views. So I'm going to click on the New Rich Text Default button, and then I'm going to edit the name of it so at the end of it it reads 3D, and then go ahead and click on OK. And then here we can make some edits to the text formatting. I know for in an interior 3D scene that's a little bit easier if the text font is a little bit smaller, so I'm going to make that adjustment here. And then next, over on the left-hand side, I find that the text is a little bit cleaner in the scene if I have a background fill and a border going around it. So I can go ahead and add those options here. I'll check border, and you can also change the color and the line style of that border if you want to. And then the fill, I'll go ahead and check that. You can change the color of the fill here, or if you want it to be a little bit more transparent. And then underneath options, there are a few 3D specific settings. First is this setting that says faces camera. As I rotate my 3D view, the 3D text will rotate with it if this setting is checked. If this setting is unchecked, the 3D text will just display in a vertical or horizontal plane that you had generated it in. I'm going to go ahead and leave this checked. And then the next setting is ignore object clipping. If this is unchecked and your 3D text is close to an object, the 3D text might be appearing to go into the object. I like to leave this checked so that it appears as if it's generating on top of the object. With these settings in place, let's go ahead and click on OK, and then go ahead and click on OK again to get back to our 3D view. Next, to add the 3D text, we can go up to our text tools and then come over to rich text. And notice how as I move my mouse into the 3D scene, my mouse has been updated to a dashed set of crosshairs with a circle in it, and it's giving me feedback as to which plane I'm going to be adding the 3D text to. So here I'm on the face of the cabinet, the side of the hood, the side of the cabinet, the floor, and then I'm going to come over to the side of the end panel and click once. And this gives me a feedback grid that I can then use to place the 3D text. So I'm going to go ahead and click about there. I can then type in my 3D text, click on OK, and you can see how that 3D text got added to the scene. Now for me, this text is a little bit elongated, and I would rather it wrap over a couple of lines. So I can click on that text, and over near the border of it, there are handles that you can use. I'm going to click on this handle and adjust it until it wraps over a few lines. And then next, if I rotate my camera view, notice how it's maybe not directly in the middle of the end panel. I can click on that 3D text and come over to our move handle in the middle and click and move it in that plane. And then if I rotate my camera view and I want to bring it a little bit closer to that end panel, if I come over to that text and I click on that move handle, notice how it still wants to move it just in that plane that I had initially created it in. I'll press spacebar to deselect it. But if I click on that text again and then click on that move handle one more time, I get these arrows that allow me to reposition it within the scene. And I'm going to come over to this blue arrow, left click on it, and then hold the control key on my keyboard to override snapping and bring it a little bit closer to the end panel. Next, I want to add an arrow going from the bottom of the text box to the end panel. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to do this. The first step is to try to get your 3D camera at eye level with the text. So I'm just going to move my camera until it's in a good position. And then next, if I select on that text, there's a little extra diamond handle at the bottom of it. I can left click and hold on that diamond handle to bring out the first segment of the leader line. And you can see how that generated. And then next, there's another diamond handle at the end of that first line. And I can left click and drag and bring that over to my end panel. And that's looking like it's in a pretty good position. Just like with the text, if you want to move it around, you can click on it and then move it. Also notice that there is the move object handle that you can use to move it. And then if you specifically wanted to move the end of that arrow so that it's pointing at a different location, you can click on the arrow, click on the little circle point for that arrow, and then you can use the icon to move the end of that arrow to a different position. Let's look at another example of adding 3D text, this time using the leader line tool. I'm back in the 3D view and I have my camera view facing the multi-switch along the wall. If we double click on the multi-switch, over on the object information panel, under the comment field, you can see that I have some information added here as to what all of the different buttons do. And we're going to use this comment field and a macro to automatically get information in the rich text leader line. So let's go ahead and cancel out of this, and then next go to our text tools, and we're going to select the leader line option. One comment about adding 3D text is that when you're locating the plane that you want to add the 3D text in, you can have that plane be located based on the bounding box of the object or on the drawing surface. If we look at the bounding box, you can see how it's going to select the whole front face of that switch. But if I come over to the option that says Draw on Surface, I can then select individual surfaces on the switch. I like the Draw on Bounding Box option. I find that it's a little bit easier for most scenarios. And then one other comment here is that there's this option that says Set Offset. When you click on this, it lets you determine how far offset from the position that you clicked your text will get added. I'm going to go ahead and adjust this to 0 so that it adds directly on the face of the switch, and then click on OK. And then with my leader line tool selected, come over to the switch. We can see that I have the vertical face of the switch, and I'm going to left click once to establish the plane. I've established the plane and I get the feedback grid, and then I can come over to the switch and snap to the center of it and right click and draw out a line. That will be the arrow segment. Release the mouse and continue the line. That will be the second segment, and right click again to place it. I can then add my text. And then because I had snapped directly onto the switch, I can insert a macro with information about it. So towards the top right of the dialog, I'll come to where it says Insert Macro, Referenced Object, Comment, and you can see how that gets populated and displays. And then I can then click on OK. And then that leader line and 3D text will be added to the scene, and I can make modifications to it as I need to. You can also have object labels or callouts display as 3D text. Let's take a look at how this works with our example being cabinet labels. The first step in seeing the cabinet labels display as 3D text is to turn on the layer for the cabinet labels. So I'm going to open up my active layer display options, select on one of my cabinets, and then over on the cabinet labels layer, just check the box in the display column, and you can see how in the 3D view those cabinet labels got turned on. If you had a schedule in your plan and in the schedule settings had it set to use a callout instead of the label, you would see the callout displayed here instead. Let's talk about some settings specific to 3D object labels. The text formatting settings for 3D object labels are controlled by the text style being used by the labels layer. So I'm going to click on the cabinet, come over to cabinet labels, and down to the bottom here, there's a section that says text style, and you'll notice that I'm using the default label style. I can click on the define button next to it to make modifications to it. Now, before you start loosely making modifications to the text style, be aware that any modifications you make here will be reflected anywhere the text style is used in the plan. For example, this will affect the display of cabinet labels in our 2D floor plan view, our window labels also use this text style, and many other items in the plan are also using this text style. So just make sure to be a bit cautious and deliberate when making changes there. With that being said, let's go ahead and click on the Define button. With our Save Text Styles open, let's go ahead and click on the Edit button. And here at the top, you can change information about the font being used, some formatting settings, the character height, and then under Options, let's look at some settings specific to 3D object labels. First is this setting that says Face Camera. When this setting is checked, anytime you rotate your camera, the label will rotate with it to always face the camera. If I uncheck this and then click on OK, and then click on OK one more time, notice how the labels are now facing in a vertical position, and as I rotate my camera, the labels maintain that vertical position. Let's get back into that text style by selecting the cabinet, selecting the cabinet labels layer, coming down to the text style and click on Define, and then click on Edit. And then let's recheck Face Camera. And then the next setting here is ignore object clipping. If this is unchecked when your label is too close to the object, it might clip inside of it. When this option is checked, it will generate and appear to always be in front of the object. Next is a setting that says reposition with camera. When this setting is unchecked, like it is now, the object label will always remain on the front or top of the object, depending on the object and its settings. But if I check this option and then click on OK, and then click on OK one more time, as I rotate my camera through the 3D view, notice how the object label, specifically over in this area, will jump so it's on the top of the cabinet or facing the front of the cabinet, depending on where my camera's position is. If we get back into the settings again for that text style, and then uncheck that, and then click on OK, the object's label will always remain stationary and will not reposition with the camera. Another setting here, if we get back into the text style settings, is this option that says transparent. If I were to check this, then our object labels would not have a white background, and instead we would be able to see through them. Let's recheck this reposition with camera setting. And then one other setting here is the text color. Currently I have this to be set by the layer, which you can see I'm on the cabinet labels layer, and it is set to be a blue color. If I click on OK and get over to this layer and then click on the color here, I can pick a new color that I would want to use. This is one way that you can differentiate label colors from each other when you have different objects using the same text style there. Let's go ahead and change that back to a blue color. And then there's also some label settings available directly within our object. Let's look at this end cabinet here and double click on it to open up the specification. And then over on the left hand side, go to label. And then here we can control that reposition with camera setting on an object by object basis. So remember, this setting makes it so that the object label remains stationary on the vertical or horizontal face of the cabinet and does not reposition with it as you rotate your camera. So notice in my preview right here how it jumped to the top when it's using the text style on setting. But if I switch this to off, it will just always remain stationary at the front face of the cabinet. Let's go ahead and switch this back to always use the text style. And then next down below underneath the orientation, faces camera, this is so that the label always rotates to face the camera, but I can change this to manual and it will just face in a vertical position. Let's go ahead and change this back to uses text style. And then right here there's an option for camera view display. Currently I have this set to automatic, but you can change this to show in this view or hide in this view so that it either always or never appears. If I change this to hide in the view and then I click on OK, notice how I no longer see the 3D display of that object label. If I open this cabinet back up and on the label panel still, under camera view display, switch this to show in view and click on OK, we can see that label, and if I rotate my view so that I am outside of the structure, notice how that 3D label is still showing in the view. Let's go ahead and open that back up and change it to automatic and then click on OK. And then one final note about labels is that you can reposition their view in 3D. If I zoom into the label, there's a little square handle right next to the center of it, and if I click on it, I then get this icon that I can use to reposition that label within the 3D view. And if I start moving the label around directly within the 3D view, if we open up that cabinet, you can see that under the camera view position and orientation settings, that has been switched to off, and instead it is manually set in the X, Y, and Z coordinates. A couple of final notes about manually added 3D text. First, the 3D text is on a layer, meaning you can turn on and off the display of it as needed. I have the active layer display options open, and if I come down to the text and click on it, you can see that it's on the text, kitchen, and bath layer, and I can just uncheck the display of it to hide it. And then if I ever want to turn that back on from my active layer display options, I can come down to that layer and then just recheck the display of it. And there it generates again in our scene. And then the final note about manually added 3D text is that the 3D text is specific to the camera view that you saved it in, meaning that if you close the camera view and you don't save it, that text that you added is lost. You can save your camera view by clicking the Save Active View button, or because you've added annotations to the view, when you go to close the camera, you'll get a message that says, do you wish to save the camera? You can click on yes. And then back in the plan view with the layer for the camera turned on, you can just double click on it to see that 3D text again. And that wraps up how to add 3D dimensions and 3D text to your camera views. We look forward to seeing your 3D renders that include these 3D annotations, and thanks for watching.
Hi, I have a question about the rendering that you're working on that had, this is kind of unrelated, but you did something magical that I can't figure out, and you put a nice handle on a beverage fridge, and I'm
Okay,
trying to figure out how you did that.
sure. Let me pull up that view real quick. So if we look at that area in the plan here, the secret is that this is just a cabinet. So if we double click on it, my dialog popped up on my other monitor, but it's just a cabinet and it has one door and just has one elongated door handle on it that's set into a vertical position. And then these right here, these are some shelves that are inside the cabinet. When you have that face of the cabinet selected, underneath shelves, you can click on specify and manually add the shelf style. This is just something that was created with a 3D solid that a hole was punched through and then added to the library. And then once it's in your library, you can add it as a shelf here. So that's the secrets for that, and more information on creating like shelves and inserting them, 3D solids. Those would be better off kind of learning those steps through a separate training video on the website.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for answering that question. I know it
Yep.
wasn't related to the 3D text, but
All good, Scotty. Thanks for attending today and for calling in.
thank you.
All right, Adrian, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, next we have Bonnie Patterson. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Bonnie.
Okay, hi, this is Bonnie. Can you hear me okay, Philip?
Hi, Bonnie. Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks for calling.
Okay. So, as I'm calling from Maine today, my question, I've been dealing with a problem. I have a specific problem in a 3D view of my bathroom on a project that I'm working on. I'm trying to get the dimension. I've got the bathroom, the toilet is, there's a wall on one side of it, and then there's a cabinet on the next. And I'm trying to go baseboard to baseboard and show the dimension. And for whatever reason, I don't know, it's not working for me. So I didn't know if you might be able to show me, how I could do a 3D dimension that shows baseboard to baseboard or baseboard to cabinet.
Okay, so let me just see if I can redraw the scenario a little bit here. Let me open up just a little sample plan I have. And let's find you said it was going from the side of a toilet to a baseboard you're looking to go to?
Actually, so what we're trying to show is, we wanted to be able to show that there's enough room on each side of the toilet for the vacuum to go on each side. So, inevitably sometimes toilets are squashed into these tiny places, and your vacuum that's 12 inches wide won't fit on either side of it. So, you got to kind of get in there and do it by hand. So, in one scenario, I've got the wall is, at the bottom of your picture, and then on the other side of it, I've got a half wall in one bathroom, and then in another, I've got a cabinet that's right there. So just trying to show, the client that there's that there's enough space, from between the baseboard and the toilet, and then on one side, and then between the toilet and then the cabinet or the half wall on the other.
Got it. So you want to make sure that from the toilet to the cabinet, there's 12 inches, and
Yep.
then from the toilet to the base molding, there's 12 inches as well.
Right, and then the third scenario is from that cabinet over to the wall. What's that dimension from the end of the cabinet to the baseboard on the wall? Because there's the baseboard obviously takes up a little bit of space from a vacuuming perspective.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So first, I would probably try to get these positioned in your 2D view first and foremost before trying
Yep.
to get it done in your 3D view. And it sounds like you're able to get those positioned in your 2D view.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let's look in the 3D view and see what we can do. So I'm just going to take a full camera. All right. And then you want to go from about the side of the toilet to the baseboard, for example. So let's first check the dimension settings that I've got dialed in. And in this scenario, probably the easiest one to use is going to be the end-to-end dimension. So I'm going to go up to the end-to-end dimension tool and let's take a look at what we've got set up here. So let's go down to fixtures. We'll go from fixture sides. And then I'm not sure if we have a specific molding check here. It looks like we don't, but let's take a look at what we can do. So I'll click on OK and come over until I locate the toilet, click on it. And then what I might try doing is coming over to this side and then coming over to the wall. Actually, I might need to dimension just the face of that toilet first. So do something like here, maybe we'll switch to the manual dimension tool. Actually, that might be a little bit easier to work with. Fixture sides. Okay, get the front. Okay, so we've got the side of it right there, and I know that that's the side because the bounding box in the floor plan view, the bounding box went directly to the side. And
Yeah.
then from here, you're wanting the point to come over to the molding.
Yeah.
So if we click on that dimension, it looks like I get that extra diamond. If I bring it over, looks like I'm initially going to the wall, but let's see if we can bring that back to the molding. So right now I cannot bring it back to the molding, and I haven't practiced this scenario, but let's see if we can convert the molding instead of automatically generating with the room. It's a freestanding object that's detached from the wall that then we can dimension to. Have you tried that yet, Bonnie?
No, I have not.
Okay, so yeah, so let's give that a shot. So if I click in the room, in the bottom toolbar, there's an option that says Make Room Molding Polyline. So it's going to be that button. And when I click on it, it'll ask which molding do you want to detach from your room settings. In this case, I only have the base molding, but if I had a crown molding, for example, I could detach that. I'll go ahead and
Okay.
click on OK. And then when I click on it, it might be a little bit hard to tell, but in the bottom left-hand corner, it says Molding Polyline. So I know it's a freestanding object in the design now. And if I come over to the dimension, let's see if we can snap our point to the molding. It looks like it might be a little bit sensitive and not want to jump onto it. Yeah, it looks like it's not picking up the dimension point for the molding. I might pause here and see if any of my colleagues know of any tricks to try to get it to snap onto the top face of that molding.
Hey, Phil, this is Scott.
Hey, Scott.
So Bonnie, do you care if it's in 3D or 2D for your dimension?
It would be, I could do it either, but it would be good to be able to see it visually. And the problem that I'm with this particular scenario is like I think the toilet is a box, right? And it looks like the box is based on the top width of the toilet versus the base of the toilet is narrower, right? So I'm trying to show that, the vacuum, the 12-inch wide vacuum can fit from the base of the toilet to the base of the base molding.
Yeah.
The 3D is just a good, it's a nice view so that people can look at it and go, yep, that's going to work.
Yep. So I would probably do what Phil's done here, convert the molding into its own unique molding. I would dimension it probably in your 2D view and verify that it looks good. And then in a 3D view, if you want to kind of show that for your client, you should be able to repeat that. And Phil, I don't know if you've tried using that tool called point-to-point dimension, and you might have to futz with that a little bit to kind of get it into the right position to get that point-to-point dimension. And then you should be able to maybe snap on to your new molding or your separated molding and get near where that toilet is. And then again, I would just verify that works in the 2D view as well, so that, yeah, something like that, that's a freestanding point.
Yeah.
And that way, it's exactly, spot on by being
Okay.
able to move that point around. And he just used the point-to-point dimension there, and it's approximation. But to verify that it's, if you're really concerned about something fitting in between there, I'd just verify it in a 2D view that's, spot on, accurate, where you can snap exactly where you want to snap.
Yeah, so I'll show you again what I did there. We're pretty close to having it figured out. So the first step would be to figure out how far is it from your molding in your 2D view. That molding is a layer that you can turn on. If we come down to my layers, moldings. All right, so we see this brown line indicating where that molding is.
Yeah.
And then I'm just gonna use a tape measure and go from the side to that molding. It looks like it goes to the room, but I believe that molding is, I believe it's 3/4 of an inch thick. Open the wall there. But I believe it's 3/4 of an inch thick, so that was 1'8", so 20 inches. And then back in the 3D view, point-to-point tool. And then the trick here that made it a little bit easier to snap to the edge, the inner edge of that molding, was switching my drawing mode from drawing on the bounding box to drawing on the surface. And then coming over to the top surface of that molding,
Okay.
click once, and then go to the left edge of it. It might be a little bit hard to tell over the video share, but then come out until I snap about there. And this is just a freestanding point in the plan, like Scott said, so you can then just manually adjust that until you have it snapping onto the edge of the toilet. And it looks like I'm close there, but if I kept it touching it, I'm sure I could get it to 20.
Yeah, that's great.
So I hope that works for you, Bonnie. You might give that a shot.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate your help.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, Adrian.
Yeah, we have another question. This one's from Lessa Taylor.
Hi, was it Leslie?
Lisa.
It's Lisa, actually.
All right, thanks, Lisa.
And hi, Philip. So I'm calling from Colorado today, and I wondered, hopefully this is quick, where did you find that switch that had 5 buttons on one faceplate?
Okay, so I believe that is in our bonus catalogs, and I believe the actual name, I was referring to it as a multi-switch, but I believe it is actually called a timer switch in our user catalog. So there I don't have it downloaded, but if we right click, download, let's type in timer again, see where that's at. So then I can right click, show in folder. So that is in the, I don't know if you can see this, Lisa, that's in the MEP number 3 decorator switches and outlets folder.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome. All right, Adrian.
Yeah, we had a couple questions that came in. One of them was, are these 3D dimension and 3D text features available in 16 or 17?
Yeah, good question. So all of the features we were showing with 3D text, those are new to X17. For the 3D dimensions, they were introduced with X16, but in X17, the difference is we have given you more control as to what the temporary dimensions locate. So if we look at those again real quick underneath Edit Active View, then click on our dimension defaults, that is this Setup Temporary panel. We're giving you a lot more control as to what points these temporary dimensions locate. So that is a new feature to the 3D dimensions in X17.
Awesome, thanks, Phil. Here's another question that came through. How do you know which layer a 3D dimension will draw on?
Yeah, good question. So the process for knowing what layer a 3D dimension comes on is the same for a 2D dimension. If you look at your active dimension defaults, in this case, my kitchen and bath dimension defaults, and we click on the edit button. Here you can dial in all the settings for what the different tools are locating. But down at the bottom here, there is an option for layer. And you can see that this is set up for dimensions, kitchen and bath. So you could create your own layer here, maybe dimensions, kitchen and bath, 3D, or change it to something else that you find more appropriate for your task at hand. So once again, that's the layer panel here in your dimension defaults.
Great, thanks, Phil. It looks like we only have a couple more here.
Okay.
Another dimension that we have, or sorry, another question we have is, how did you create the dimensions and the text on the cabinet like the one illustrated on the sign up page?
Oh, okay. Let's take a look at what the person's referring to. I think I have a rendering of what that looks like. All right, so that it is referring to this vanity that you see here with text and with dimensions. You might have seen it on our website or social media or email. So the question is, how would you create something that is this detailed? Can we just go over a few of the tools to do this? So I am going to open up a plan that just has a few cabinets in it, one of them being that cabinet. And then let's take a 3D view facing that vanity. So that's going to be this vanity over on the left here. And this is what we have. And let's look at two scenarios. Maybe we won't run through the full thing, but let's look at maybe how to add two of these dimensions and then maybe two of these pieces of text. So first step is to try to get your camera facing as face on as you can with the object you want to dimension. So here I'm in a pretty good position. Next step is to determine the best dimensioning tool for your task at hand. And because I'm going to be dimensioning across multiple objects, the countertop, the cabinet faces, and so forth, the best tool is going to be the manual dimension tool. So next I want to make sure that the settings are looking good. So if I come up to the dimension tools, manual dimension, and double click, it will open up my dimension defaults. And then down here, I can check to just make sure that we are configured correctly. And it looks like we're in good shape. Let's go ahead and uncheck fixtures and appliances just to be safe. And we'll click on OK. Come back into the plan, and then I like to use my dimensioning tools in bounding box mode as much as possible. I believe a second ago we changed it to surface mode when we were trying to dimension that molding, but I'm going to switch to draw on bounding box, and then come over to the face of the vanity, which is a couple of cabinets, and click once to establish the dimensioning plane, which will be in our vertical face. I get that feedback grid, and then I'm going to come over to the edge of the waterfall, and then the left click and drag and draw out our dimension. And it looks like it's picking up a handful of points. Let's see what we get. So starting on the left and then working our way to the right, we get the waterfall, the cabinet, and it looks like these points here, they're picking up, I'm guessing these are holes in the countertop at the top. Super easy to remove those points. We can simply select on it, come up to the extra diamond handle, and then just drag those off into free space to eliminate them. So there we have that cabinet. And then let's get one more dimension for the other end of the waterfall. So I've got the extra diamond with my string selected. I'll just bring it over there. And then next, let's push it to the bottom by clicking on it, and then clicking the red handle and moving it down till it's about there. And then let's push it back until it's maybe underneath it a little bit. So to do that, I can click on the dimension, click on that handle one more time, and then let me rotate a little bit. So click on that handle, and then use my blue arrows to come back a little bit. That's looking fine for our example. Next, let's take a look at how to add, let's just do this dimension over on the left-hand side, this vertically running one. So probably the best dimension tool to use here is going to be that manual dimension tool again. And it should be in pretty good settings since we just used it, but let's rotate the 3D camera so it's facing a little bit more head on. Go up to the dimension tool, left click to establish the dimensioning plane, come up to the object, left click and drag it down here. and that's looking good. And then I'm going to drag this off to the side, and then I can add that last point going to the bottom of the waterfall. And then next, let's take a look at some text. Let's look at 2 examples of text. Let's first pick on this light rail text that we see here. So first, I am going to go up to our text tools. I'm going to use the leader line tool. And then with these text tools, I like to double check that I have the offset correctly adjusted. So I'll click on that. 3 inches popping away from it is okay. So it's going to be 3 inches away from the object I click on towards the camera. So that's pretty good. Come over to this general area of the cabinet. Left click once to establish the plane. Come down to the light rail. Right click to drag out one point of the arrow, and then continue it. Right click again to place it, and then type in my text. Click on OK. And that's looking like it's in a pretty good, reasonable position. And then this last text at the top, this one is a little interesting because it's facing vertically, kind of in the middle of where the makeup dispenser is, but we don't have a vertical plane necessarily in this area that's at a perpendicular angle to establish that plane with. So let's take a look at some tricks for getting that in there. So kind of reiterate, I know it was a mouthful to take in. I want the text to be about in this position, but vertically facing the front of the island. We do have a vertical face right here if I were to come to the bounding box option and try to do it there, but this is such a small area, it might be a little bit sensitive and touchy to try to get it attached to. So what I like to do is I like to find a big face, in this case, the front of the cabinet, get your text there and then push it back a little bit until it's about in the middle. So let's take a look at how to do that. So I'm going to go up to our text tools, select rich text, come over to the cabinet, click once to establish the plane, and then click to place it in a vertical position. And then just type in my text. That's looking pretty good. And then notice that as I rotate the camera, that text is rotating with me. And that makes it a little bit challenging to get it kind of aligned vertically where I want it to. So one thing I can do temporarily or permanently is I can double click on it, and then under options, uncheck where it says faces camera, and then click on OK. And now as I rotate the camera, notice how that text is not rotating and it's still just facing in a forward position. And that just makes it a little bit easier to move and get it aligned where I want it. So I'll come over to the text, click on that move handle, move it this way. I'll move it up. And then next I need to push it back so that it is about aligned with the makeup dispenser. So I'll come over to the text and then click on that move handle in the middle of it to get that icon that lets me move it. And then as I come over and I hover my mouse over those arrows, those will be the direction that I can move it. And then I'll left click on it and pull it and move it until it's about in the middle of where that makeup dispenser is. Now it looks like it's in a pretty good position. And the reason why I do that is because then, let's push it off to the right maybe a little bit more. It's because then it makes it very easy to get an arrow coming off of it and snapping to about the middle of it. So now if I come up to the makeup dispenser and I click, or excuse me, if I come up to the text and I click, notice how if I click towards the bottom, I get this diamond on the bottom. If I click towards the left, I get the diamond on the left. And then I can left click and drag it out. And that just makes it a little bit easier to get that arrow positioned where I want it to. And if I'm happy with that and I feel like it's looking good, then I can double click on that text again and then recheck faces camera so that when I rotate my 3D view, that text is always facing me, but that arrow remains positioned where I wanted it to be pointing. So Adrian, I hope that answers the attendee's question and gets them pointed in the right direction.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Thanks,
Yeah.
Bill.
Did we have any other questions come in?
Yep, we have one last one. This is from Anya Nowick. Go ahead and unmute your mic, Anya.
Good afternoon. This is Anya from New Jersey. I'm curious on how you would enter dimensions on the exterior elevation of the house rendering.
Oh, okay. So there is a story pole dimension tool. I didn't show it in the prepared remarks, but I'll show kind of what the final result is, and then we can do it together. So this is what you can get to generate using the story pole dimension. So let's go ahead and delete this. The story pole dimension settings, if we come up to where it says default settings, and then we go down to dimension and then down to auto story pole, here is where you can configure them. Some of the highlights of these settings, starting on the general panel, these options up the right here allow you to configure where the dimension will generate, left, right, or on top of it. Or you can have inner formats locating more things like windows and things of that nature. If you do have an inner format, you can pick the objects that you're going to be locating. Locate elevations. For story pole dimensions, this is probably a little bit more important. Over here on the left are different points on the exterior of your plan that you can include. You can simply click on one of them and then click on the add button, and it'll go into the marks to include column. Similarly, to remove points, you can click on a point and click on remove, and it'll go back into the available marks column. So the first step is to get this configured to your liking in your default settings. I'll go ahead and cancel out of that since I was happy with those how they are. And then the next step is to get your camera positioned facing the wall that you want to generate those auto story pole dimensions to. So here I feel like I'm looking in pretty good shape. And then our final step is to dimension them. It's to add those story pole dimensions. So underneath the automatic dimension tools, there is an option here that says auto story pole dimensions. And I'll click once, and those dimensions will come in based on your settings that we just looked at. And just like with the other dimensions in the plan, you can manually edit them. So if I want to move that string closer, easy to do that. If I want to add points, there's that extra diamond handle, and I can just drag it around wherever I feel like it's needed. So I hope that answers your question on how to add those story pole dimensions.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome. Well, it sounds like those were all of the questions for today. So I think with that, we will go ahead and call it a session. A few reminders on events that we have coming up. If you come over to the Chief Architect website and you come over to where it says User Center at the top and then down to Events and Training, our next training event is going to be our Chief Academy training here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho at the end of August. It is our biggest training event of the year. It's about 2.5 days of classroom style training, and there's networking events in the evening around the training. It's a super fun event. If you're looking to get a little bit more proficient in the program, you might consider looking into that. And then following today's session, tomorrow there will be a residential boot camp. So if you're new to the program or on the trial, or just want a refresher on how the tools work, that will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific. And then next week will be our final webinar for the X17 tools. We're gonna go about productivity features available in X17. That will be at the same time, same place. We will send out an email with a replay of today's session sometime tomorrow afternoon, and that email will also include a link to a survey so that you can let us know how we did. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign off for today. Thanks everyone for attending, and we hope to see you same time, same place next week, or here at the end of August at Chief Academy. Thanks for your time today.